Sometimes men start to miss you not when you leave, but when they are finally left in silence. Not physical silence, but inner silence. This silence does not come in the noise of parting or in the heat of arguments. It comes later, on that very night when the soul begins to whisper what the ego has been shouting over for so long. It is then that a man suddenly remembers not events, not words, not even your face, but a state of mind. That feeling when he didn't have to pretend around you, when there was no expectation in your gaze, no pressure in your gestures, no anxiety in your presence. It was like a breath of fresh air for a person who hadn't breathed for a long time. We live in an era of overload. Outwardly, there is success, goals, and competition, but inside, there is exhaustion that no one has the right to show. Men are used to being strong, capable, and decisive, but they are tired. No one asks them how they feel. And almost every encounter with the world is another scene in which he must play the perfect role. And then, in this hopeless play, sometimes a woman appears who does not demand, does not pressure, does not play games. A woman with whom he can relax, just sit silently, just be. You didn't compete with his weakness. You didn't reproach him for his silence. You didn't force him to become someone else. And that's why he misses you. Because in your silence, he heard himself. In your peace, he rested from a world where everything must be earned. And you didn't demand anything, you simply were. But here's the paradox. When a man finds such a woman, he is not always able to understand what it was. He does not realize the value of peace until he finds himself again among those who want something from him, ask for something, demand something. And then he remembers. There was one who did not need to win anything. She didn't need him to prove himself. She accepted him in a way that he himself was afraid to accept himself. And that's when the longing begins. It's not loud or hysterical. It's like the wind coming at unpredictable times. He may be at a bar with friends, sitting in his car, or even hugging someone else. And suddenly, there is silence. The kind of silence that used to be you. And then a void arises inside. Not because you are gone, but because you are not an attachment, but a refuge. And now that refuge is gone. But longing does not exist in a vacuum. It reaches out like a root to another feeling, to the memory of freedom. Because where there was no pressure, there was another rare thing. Space. Space to be yourself. Space to breathe. Space to retreat and not lose love. And this brings us to the next facet of this longing, to the next state that men are afraid to admit but secretly crave: freedom. And when a man loses that inner peace that your silent presence gave him, he begins to search for it again, but not in new words, but in the familiar feeling of freedom, because peace is always followed by breath, space, the feeling that you are not being squeezed, pushed, or filled with someone else, but left with room for yourself. And here arises something that men almost never put into words, but feel acutely. Longing comes not only for the woman with whom he felt calm. It intensifies when he remembers that with you he felt not obligated, but free. Because you did not cling to him, did not cling to him, did not look for reasons to be needed every minute. You didn't turn love into suffocation, you gave him space. This is a rare quality. It is hardly noticed in the moment, but it begins to resonate when it disappears. Most women confuse intimacy with constant presence, as if love is measured by the number of messages per day or the length of a phone call before bed. But men, especially those who carry anxiety and inner overload, value something else: respect for their pause, for their closeness, for their right not to speak and not be punished with silence in return. It was this subtle form of trust that set you apart. You didn't demand reports, ask leading questions, or try to read between the lines. You knew how to just be there, without disappearing or fading away. And this created a feeling of extraordinary lightness, the very thing that, paradoxically, holds a man stronger than any attachment. Because next to you, he did not feel like a prisoner. He felt like the chosen one. And this is what remains in his memory, even when you are gone, even if time has passed. Because in every new contact, Where accusations, expectations, and distrust resurface, his subconscious remembers you not as ideal, but as respectful, mature, a woman who does not hold back but chooses, does not check but observes, does not catch but watches. And that is why he begins to miss you. But he doesn't miss your words. He misses how he felt around you, the independence, the partnership, the respect, rather than control. Not the fear of loss, but the understanding that even if you leave, you won't fall apart. And in this confidence, in this autonomy, the strongest contrast began to shine, because you didn't just give freedom, you knew how to live in it. And this is the most painful reminder for a man. You weren't afraid to be alone, but he was. In the moment he feels this difference, a new feeling is born in him, deeper than longing. It is admiration mixed with loss, because it was not just freedom that was with you. It was a woman who shone without him, and this light, independent, not connected with his presence, remains in his memory in the strongest way, because he suddenly realizes that you were with him not because you needed him, but because you chose him. And this is a completely different form of connection, one that is lost and cannot be replaced, because it is not based on fear of loneliness. It is not fed by control. It does not require confirmation. It is of a different nature, one where a woman shines on her own. And when she loves, it is not out of need. It is out of abundance. That's when the most bitter longing begins, not instantly, not the moment he leaves, but later, when he sees that your radiance has not disappeared without him. When, contrary to all expectations, you did not dissolve into suffering, did not build your life around his return, did not wait by the window, you moved on. Not demonstratively, not out of spite, not to show how well you were doing, but genuinely, with inner strength, with self-respect, with a silence that is not silent, but alive. And in this light, without that independence, you become an almost mythical figure in his memory, because it breaks all the usual patterns. If she left, she suffers. If she is silent, it means she is waiting. If she doesn't write, she is checking. But you didn't suffer, you didn't wait, you didn't check. You just continued to be yourself. And that was the strongest blow. Psychology calls this the phenomenon of self-sufficiency. It is not loneliness, it is completeness. It is when a woman is able to rejoice without looking back, able to build without waiting for approval, able to laugh without needing confirmation of her value. And if you lived your life this way after him, not pretending, but truly delving into yourself, your interests, your movement, then longing will begin to grow into him like a root, because one day, on a random evening, he will suddenly see a photo of you, where you are not with a new man, not in a deliberately happy setting, but simply shining, perhaps in the mountains, perhaps with a book, perhaps with friends, but truly radiant. And then something inside him will shrink, because it will not be jealousy or resentment, but the feeling that he has lost something whole, and that what he had did not need him to exist. This is where true male nostalgia begins. Not for the body, not for the voice, but for the opportunity to be with someone who doesn't need you and yet chooses you. Someone who can be happy and yet invites you into that light. And it's unbearable, because with you he didn't feel needed, he felt recognized. And that is much stronger, and he will not be able to forget it. Because every woman after you who tries to cling to him, to prove herself, to earn his love, will only reinforce this inner shadow, the shadow of the memory of you, of the fact that happiness can be not demonstrative, not loud, not begging for attention, but simply yours. And it is in this light, which you did not lose, but, on the contrary, strengthened after the breakup, that the sharpest sting lies. You did not become less, you became deeper, and he saw it, he felt it, he could not erase it. But there is another reason why he misses you. Another psychological hook, deeper than jealousy, deeper than nostalgia, deeper than admiration. It has nothing to do with your light or your freedom. It has to do with what he never fully understood, with what you didn't tell him, didn't reveal, didn't let him fully experience. And that's when the real anxiety begins. Quiet, unconscious. It lives somewhere between boredom and anxiety, between memory and doubt. It doesn't speak directly, it whispers. It pushes him to look at his phone screen, scroll through your old messages, open a dialogue in which nothing happens, and close it again and again, because now it's not about you, but about the question you left behind. You left without slamming the door. You didn't make a scene. You didn't turn your heart inside out in a last attempt to be heard. You just left. But not like those who said everything and were disappointed, but like those who took something with them, like those who left an empty space in the story. Not an ending, but a pause. Not a period, but an ellipsis. And in this incompleteness, you became part of his inner uncertainty, his unspoken words. The human psyche is such that it is precisely unfinished stories that haunt us the longest. This explains the effect that psychologists call the Zeigarnik effect. Our mind returns to what remains open. We can forget what happened, but not what could have happened. You left not pain, you left a question, and that question began to live in his mind. What if I rushed into things? What if she was my chance, which I failed to recognize? What if I never find anything like that again? And the quieter you become, the less you talk about the past, the deeper you retreat into yourself, the louder this incompleteness sounds in his mind, because other women try to be understandable, transparent, explain, achieve, cover everything down to the last detail, and you don't. You didn't tell everything. You didn't reveal yourself completely. You didn't make yourself an open book. And not because you were playing games, but because you knew that a woman is not an explanation. She is a space, a mystery. She is a world that is entered not by right, but by trust. You didn't impose your pain on him. You didn't beg him to understand. You didn't ask for a chance. And by doing so, you didn't weaken him, but rather left a hole in him. Incomprehensibility, understatement, a shadow. And now he can't let it go, because the brain forgets what has boundaries, but never forgets what has no end. And now, months later, evening, phone. He writes, "Hi, just wanted to see how you are." This message is not just politeness, not just boredom. It contains an unbearable desire to close what he himself could not live through to the end. And you didn't give him that opportunity because you left not to be understood, but to be preserved in your integrity, in your depth, in your mystery. And you will not return, not because you are proud, but because you have already gone inside yourself, into that reality where you do not wait to be understood, explained, saved, because you yourself have become your own support. And that is exactly why he will miss you. Not for you, but for the inaccessible feeling that you gave and took away. Not for the memory, but for the untold future. Not for the contact, but for the rarity. You could not be consumed to the end. And in this lies your mark, your myth, your power. Because a man does not yearn for women he has understood. He yearns for women he has not had time to understand and will never be able to. Because women he has not been able to understand become not just a shadow, they become part of an inner world to which he no longer has access. And the more time passes, the clearer this inner call sounds. I lost something that did not belong to me, but touched me more deeply than anything I held in my hands. But this is where the story about him ends, because the truth is not in his longing, not in his messages, not in his regrets. The truth is in you. You were peace, you were space, you were light, you were a mystery, but most of all, you were yourself. And if all of this was genuine, if it wasn't done out of need or for fun, if it wasn't a pretense for effect, then your strength is not in getting him back, but in the fact that you left without losing yourself. Female maturity begins with refusing to ask the question, does he miss me? This question is no longer necessary for someone who has found herself, who no longer lives on emotional crumbs, who does not wait for an answer to feel valuable, who does not turn someone else's attention into proof of her own significance, because she already knows everything she needs to know inside. And then, in this silence, it no longer matters whether he looks at your profile, writes to you at night, or remembers you, because you are no longer waiting for something external. You are in motion. You are in life. You are growing. And this is the rarest form of energy, the one that does not shout, "Come back," but whispers, "I am moving on." And even if you look, it's too late. This is the true power of a woman, not in manipulation, but in deep clarity, in independence, in silence, in self-sufficient radiance. This does not mean that she does not love. It means that love is no longer a commodity, but a radiance, no longer a transaction, but a presence, no longer dependence, but choice. And then a man really begins to miss not the woman who made him the center of her world, but the woman who was her own universe and let him in for a second and then left, not because he was unworthy, but because she was whole. And if you are listening to all this and still asking, "But how do I make him miss me?" then you are still at the beginning of the journey. And if you are listening and at some point you forgot who we were talking about because you felt yourself, then you are almost there. Almost in that state where being yourself is more important than being needed. And that's when they miss you. Not because you were playing games, but because you went to a place where it is truly bright. And they cannot get there. They can only watch from afar and remember